DRS, Formula One's drag reduction system. It's something that's been in the headlines in the sport for the last few races, and it's fair to say it's drawn quite a bit of attention. I'm joined here at Formula One's Media and Technology Centre by Craig Scarborough to have a look at this system, which was designed a few years ago to spice up the on-track action. Craig, tell us a little bit about DRS and why it was introduced.
DRS has had a rather unusual entry to Formula One. It was never really on the drawing board at any point, but it does go back to 2009 with the Overtaking Working Group finding ways to try and improve how cars are able to follow and overtake each other. Back in 2009 we didn't have DRS, but we had an adjustable front wing that has been largely forgotten now because it was so ineffective for actually improving overtaking. Meanwhile, 2010, McLaren introduced the F-duct, which everybody copied, and suddenly you had a means to drop all the drag from the rear wing by stalling the rear wing along the straights to allow an overtake or just to improve lap times. The F-duct really wasn't the solution that Formula One was looking for, so instead we got DRS, which basically allowed the driver, under certain circumstances, to open the rear wing, reduce the drag and make an overtaking manoeuvre. It's been fairly controversial over those years. Mechanically it does the job, but really, in my opinion at least, the drivers get this as a get out of jail card for virtually every lap they're behind someone. I don't think that works quite so well in Formula One.
Now, one of the things about DRS, the way it actually works is the rear wing itself opens up this 85mm gap, and what that does is, rather than the wing generating downforce and drag, of course, it cuts that drag away, hence drag reduction system, and allows the car to drive through the air a lot more smoothly, and that gives them a top speed advantage.
It's absolutely a massive advantage, and the difference would be is if you could go around the corners with a Monaco rear wing and then get onto the straight, be able to swap that rear wing for a Monza rear wing, which is absolutely tiny. That's the effect of DRS. That's the range in reduction in downforce and drag that you get with this system. So it's clearly really efficient to allow you to take that overtaking manoeuvre.
Now, DRS can punch a hole in the race order, but those rear wing elements at 320 kph are underneath a huge amount of aerodynamic load. The forces through those elements are absolutely huge, and a few times since DRS's introduction we have seen a few problems, and I'd like to just take a look at some of those problems that we've seen. Here we see Max Verstappen coming out of the pit lane in Mexico. It's this Red Bull, not Sergio Perez, goes past. Now look at the vibration that goes through the rear of the car. It literally shakes the rear wing of that Red Bull apart, because these elements of a Formula One car's rear wing have to be exactly precisely right, but also as light as possible. And you can see as the vibration goes through the wing, the actuator fails, the wing starts flapping around, and there's damage to the back of that Red Bull rear wing. And we saw the team having to fix that in the garage during that session. And it's not the only problem that Red Bull have had this season. They're not alone in this, but I thought we'd take a look at more recently at the Brazilian Grand Prix, end of qualifying 3. Max Verstappen on his fastest run comes down the start-finish straight on the old oval at Interlagos, hits that big bump as he goes into the banking, and you can just see the rear wing starting to move around. His DRS actuator looks like it's failed yet again. You get a slightly clearer view of that though when you look from the onboard, rear-facing onboard camera. Look at the top section of the wing. The DRS opens, normally that's what it's meant to look like, but then the car hits a bump, you can see the sparks coming out the bottom, and then look, the wing fails, it starts fluttering around. After this run, Red Bull had to take the car away and change that rear wing because it had been damaged. That's something you're allowed to do within the regulations, but those DRS actuators, they have to withstand huge forces, go through a huge amount of work. And Craig, I know you've been looking at how they actually work under the skin.
So I've got some pictures, and this is just a typical rear wing with the DRS setup from 2021. So you can see the DRS pod here. Here you actually have it mounted to the Swan Mech rear wing mounting. If you have a twin ones, this would actually just mount it directly to the wing, and it's the mechanics inside here that does the work to pull the wing open. But some other stuff we can see here is the pivots either side of the wing, and these have to be within 5 to 10 millimeters of the rear edge of the wing, and that's where the wing opens up from before you get that gap inside of the 85 millimeters. What you also have here, which most teams are now running, that the wings have got wider than a few years ago, is just an extra support and bearing in the middle of the wing to make sure that it doesn't flex down when it's either open or in its closed position. But then you can see the lever arm coming down here, and this is what's doing the work to actually open up the wing when you're going along the straight. So if we have a look at the next image, this is a view inside now of the rear wing. So you can see the main plane of the rear wing and then just in shadow there where the flap would normally be. There's been lots of different ways teams have actually operated DRS over the years. Back when it first came out, 2011, Williams had a system that literally just pushed the wing up from underneath. You may remember Mercedes had no DRS pod early in their years. They had systems inside the rear wing end plates. Most teams will have a pod in the middle, and again, the way the linkage works does vary between something quite simple to something quite complex. But what you have is a little hydraulic actuator here, and when the driver gets the permission to use DRS, which will either come as beeps in their ears or a light on their steering wheel and they push the button for DRS, hydraulic pressure floods into here, and this pulls the mechanism open, pulls the rear wing flap open. And I've got to remember, this will be already at near top speed, so the loads on that flap are enormous. The pressure required to bring this open is equally enormous. All of this mechanism would incorporate the stop that makes sure that the flap doesn't open too much, and equally as it all closes down, as you saw with some of the Red Bull problems, it also gives you that stop position that closes it in exactly the right slot gap at the bottom there. But the big question with DRS that we're always asked is 2022. Now last week we spoke to F1's head of aerodynamics, Jason Somerville, and he explained DRS will still be on the cars in 2022. Everyone thought it wouldn't be because it wasn't on the show car. So what I've done is I've drawn the 2022 rear wing with the DRS setup, and it will be exactly the same as it is now. But what you'll have is what you didn't see on the concept cars is a split in the rear wing flap here, still the same sort of pivots that we had before, and the DRS pod in the middle. So that will still open up. The reason we're having this is not simply because these new cars won't be able to overtake, is because they've become so successful in reducing the wake behind them that the slipstream is reduced as well. And IndyCar had a very similar problem when they reduced the wake on their cars. So that really is just to allow a little bit of extra slipstream in to allow an overtaking manoeuvre to come on. Formula One reserves the right to remove this if they find that it's not necessary or change the regulations around this. So we'll just see how that develops over these coming years with these new cars.
Now these DRS pods are something that the teams already put a huge amount of work in, and it's something just worth taking a look at. There's still a lot of difference in the designs of the different DRS pods up and down the pit lane in 2021. Now the external carbon fibre shapes you see on the different cars, that's something the teams can modify, but the actuators inside, like you drew, Craig, they're only allowed 2 different variations through the season, a high downforce version and a, well, pretty much everywhere else version, and that's a homologated part. So you can see the different solutions that the teams are experimenting with, and I'm guessing we're going to see quite a lot of different solutions on display next year with these designs.
Yeah, the teams have got lots to play with. As I say, the mechanism can be something as simple as just pulling a single link or having a pair of links. It's just how they engineer it, and they want this wing to open up very rapidly and equally shut very rapidly. The other issue is they've got to make sure that it doesn't fail in the open position, which we have seen a lot. So the hydraulics and springs inside all of this setup make sure that that doesn't happen as well. Now,
not all of the teams actually have the hydraulics based in that pod itself. We saw some of the teams having very small pods. And the reason for that is down one of the support elements of the rear wing, they actually have a rod that runs through it, and the actual linkage, the actuation is done down by the gearbox somewhere, and it just shoves that rod up and pulls it back down to open and close the flap. Haas did that for a few years. The reason I know that is we've got a coffee table around the corner out of one of those rear wings, and it's still got the DRS mechanism in it, and I know you and I were playing with that a few weeks ago. So it's an interesting area of design for the teams, and something we are going to see a bit more of. But going forward into the future of the sport, I think we are going to see not just DRS, we're going to see more adjustable aerodynamics. That's something that's been discussed as a concept at this point. It's not really anything like a fact yet, but some people are talking about, wouldn't it be nice if we had adjustable front and rear wings, but also different cooling apertures. So when you're going down the straight at Monza, your cooling holes get a bit smaller. As you slow down, they get a bit bigger. That's something that is being thought about, but only as a concept at the moment. We'll have to wait and see to 2026 to see what the new regulations bring then, but I'm pretty excited because I think adjustable aerodynamics like DRS, they really are the future of Formula One. And not just Formula One, you can see adjustable aerodynamics and almost drag reduction systems on a number of production cars in a very nascent form at the moment. As you drive down the motorway, certain cars will have adaptable ducting and adaptable wings depending on the speed of the car, and mostly to save fuel and reduce drag. That's a real Formula One technology that showed its relevance outside of the sport.